The Corinth Dominion did not conquer in the traditional sense. They arrived. They appeared in orbit, unfurled their lattice-shrouded arcs into the skies of lesser worlds, and transmitted a singular truth into the biosphere. Divinity is not abstract. It is encoded, delivered, and enforced. A voice spoke, never raised, never angry, and those below began to believe, not by choice but by design. The arcs carried what the Dominion called credence weaves, neuromimetic arrays that operated on a quantum harmonic principle of obedience. The more you heard the liturgy, the more it made sense. The more it made sense, the more your synaptic lattice bent toward compliance. In weeks, cities bowed. In months, cultures forgot they had once resisted. The arcs didn't reduce populations, they rewrote them, from the inside out. The doctrine had spread across 5 sectors without a single battle. Resistance wasn't encountered so much as it was nullified, recalibrated into reverence. Dominion protocol enforced this rhythm. Disruption meant questioning. Questioning meant flaw. Flaw was heresy. And heresy, in a society built on the certainty of its own sanctity, was a threat even gods feared to name aloud. Earth was filed under Dormant Catalog B, non-responsive, pre-unified, unarmed. It hadn't broadcast a signal in over 2 decades. The last probe had returned with grainy visuals of decaying orbital rings, static-laden transmissions in obsolete formats, and atmospheric scans suggesting isolationism or collapse. The Dominion saw no reason to prioritize the Sol system. There was no worship, no war, no noise. A closed mouth, as doctrine stated, cannot reject godhood, and so Earth was archived. That changed on cycle 1749-2, when Arc 7X5/Neptune went silent. Not disrupted, not damaged, not destroyed, just gone. One moment, it pulsed its standard compliance rhythms into the void, mapping neural potential across Neptune's orbital shadow. The next, its signal folded into nothing. No flare signature, no radiation spike. Just a hollow absence where 13.2 megatons of divine machinery had floated hours before. At first, the Dominion assumed technical error. The Ark's command uplink could fail for routine reasons. Gravitational distortion from Neptune's magnetosphere, subroutine desync, misfire, and self-calibrating relic harmonics. But the Dominion didn't tolerate unknowns. Silence required explanation. And so they sent a scout vessel. Clarity of intent, a small, minimally crude recon suite configured to interface with faulty arcs and reassert control. The crew followed standard protocols. Docking was clean, atmospheric lock achieved, but the moment the airlock hissed open, the lead technician froze. The arc wasn't malfunctioning, it had been disassembled, not externally, not by force, internally, with surgical precision. Panels were removed, not shattered. Control cores detached cleanly from their cradles. There was no carbon scoring, no blast residue. The neural lattice nodes hadn't been sabotaged. They had been unhooked, categorized, and stacked along the internal spine of the arc in exacting patterns. As if whoever did it wasn't in a hurry, as if they knew how it all worked. Worse still, the arc's memory substrate had been partially rerouted, entire belief cycle logs stripped of content, but still active, flickering loops containing nothing. It was like someone had removed not just the brain, but the soul. The technicians attempted a full memory sync. What they received wasn't encrypted. It wasn't even disguised. A single direct message had been left embedded in the central lattice frame. Plain text, standard protocol language, encoded using Dominion symbols as if to mock their sacred interfaces. 4 words. Test 1 concluded. Proceeding. It wasn't a threat. There was no demand. No ultimatum. Just statement. Cold. Controlled. Unimpressed. When the clarity of intent returned, the crew submitted their report with ritual clarity, expecting immediate retaliation orders. Instead, the command tribunal responded with restrained concern. The language suggested a rogue intelligence or internal dissident, perhaps an artifact breach from earlier annexations. Earth's involvement was mentioned, but dismissed. Dormant systems do not conduct surgical reverse dismantling of divinity-grade artifacts, one archivist noted. Another speculated a Dominion vessel might have suffered ideological corruption. The Corinth Creed did not allow for divine structures to be undone. Therefore, this one hadn't been. Not truly, not intentionally. Some flaw had twisted the record. A misinterpretation, a glitch. But protocol required closure. A small detachment of Fleet Penumbra, one Ark and two escorting temple cruisers, was dispatched under a Tier 3 doctrine purification order. Their mission was not punitive, nor even strategic. It was clerical. Investigate the Sol anomaly. Re-establish faith-compliant structures. And if the dormant world resisted, correct it. Not with fire, with certainty. The Corinth Dominion did not believe in escalation. They believed in conclusion. The gods did not argue. They arrived, observed, and made truth known. And so they turned toward Earth, convinced they were walking into silence. They had no idea what silence really meant. Not yet. Beneath the Siberian crust, under 40 meters of reinforced strata, Riven Hal sat alone at a console that hadn't pinged the surface in 12 years. No updates, no transmissions, no directives. He liked it that way. The chair wasn't ergonomic. The air was cold. The lighting systems never fully stabilized after the third year. But none of that mattered. What mattered was that every circuit humming behind him existed for a single reason: to dismantle gods. Not with fire, not with noise, but with silence, the kind that made doctrine rot. Protocol Viren had begun before the public even knew the Dominion existed. Long before, credence arcs shimmered across other skies, before alien broadcasts crackled in distant observatories, before Earth's Space Defense Coalition quietly disbanded for reasons the press never uncovered. Riven had seen the shape of the threat first, not in ships, in patterns. The Dominion didn't conquer. They converted like a virus that thought itself divine. Their technology wasn't just hardware. It was philosophy, encoded and weaponized. They didn't fight for territory. They rewrote meaning itself. And Riven, for all his faults, and there were many, understood one truth faster than anyone else. Fighting belief with bullets was suicide. He hadn't always lived underground. Once he'd chaired the Orbital Architecture Council, overseeing human defense constellations and early response AI networks. But when Earth intercepted its first Dominion probe, a shimmering column that parked itself just outside Mars' orbit and began transmitting recursive harmonic chants, Riven didn't wait for clearance. He ordered it brought down and dissected. What they found inside wasn't propulsion or warhead arrays. It was a memory lattice, flowing with rotating syllables encoded at the quantum level. Its only purpose was to be observed. That was all. You looked at it, heard it, and the human mind began adapting. Not because it understood, but because it couldn't not. The probe never fired. But the lab tech who'd volunteered for long-term exposure started referring to it as he. A week later, he'd scratched the phrase, "let him in," into the doorframe of Riven's personal chamber. After that, Riven had the chamber sealed, burned, and everything inside it reduced to vapor. He filed the report as an AI containment failure. It wasn't. It was the first proof that the Dominion didn't need weapons. They were the weapon. Viren was born in that moment, not as a defense protocol, but as a framework to answer one question: how do you kill something that doesn't attack? Riven's answer was brutal in its simplicity. You don't. You make it wrong. You hold up a mirror it can't survive. Belief, he understood, was a closed loop. All you had to do was force contradiction inside it, and it would implode on its own. But it couldn't be loud. It couldn't be proud. The Dominion thrived on response, on acknowledgement. Anything loud enough to resist could be reinterpreted as submission. So Earth went quiet. Publicly, Riven resigned. Privately, he was relocated to a black site under the pretense of mental instability and disloyalty. He signed the documentation himself. For the next 12 years, he orchestrated humanity's only surviving weapon, ESS Aegis Veil. It wasn't a warship by any traditional sense. No torpedoes, no plasma arrays, no hull-mounted guns. Its spine was built for stealth insertion, its core lined with zero-point neurocyclers, capable of mimicking Dominion chant structures, but inverted, destabilized. Where credence arcs projected alignment, Aegis Veil projected variance. It wasn't built to kill. It was built to fail their gods on purpose. in ways their systems couldn't tolerate. The ship didn't broadcast orders. It embedded uncertainty. Every waveform was tuned to flicker half a degree off the Dominion's neural harmonics, just enough to seed contradiction, but not enough to be filtered as noise. And now in his cold chamber, Riven watched as Aegis Veil returned from its full system stress simulation. One final diagnostic cascade flowed across the console. The model held. The neural divergence embedded during the Neptune operation had propagated through the Dominion's sacred systems exactly as predicted. They hadn't destroyed the Ark. They'd hollowed it, left the skin intact while rearranging the organs into a shape the gods couldn't explain. That was the brilliance of it. Leave no fire, leave no trace. Just let them wonder. He stood slowly. The bones in his knees cracked like ice shifting. His body hadn't aged well. Too many years in the sublayer, too much exposure to stabilized isolation meds. But the mind was sharp, focused. The quiet inside him wasn't detachment, it was calculation. Above him, invisible to the stars, Aegis Veil waited in anchored low orbit, cloaked and passive, its systems humming the subtle beat of betrayal. It wasn't beautiful, it was true. "Cycle verified," the console finally whispered. Riven exhaled once. "It is time." As if responding to his voice alone, the orbital array lit for half a second, a pulse so short no radar could latch. Aegis Veil shifted position. Dominion relay nodes across Sector Theta caught the micro-distortion. Most discarded it, one did not. Out past Saturn's bow shock, the first edge of Corinth Fleet penumbra shimmered into system space. To them, the movement was just magnetic interference, a cold world turning in silence. To Riven Hall, it was confirmation. The gods had noticed, and they were coming. Fleet penumbra arrived with the grace of inevitability. Their formation was slow, deliberate, like celestial scripture, written across the void. Each ship bore the Dominion's signature curvature, organic ridges mimicking vertebrae, their hulls designed to reflect sacred geometries only understood through trance equations. At the fleet's core drifted the Ark, pulsing its credence weave in widening frequency spirals, already preparing to entangle Earth's neurological architecture. From orbit, it looked like reverence made manifest, a god's heart beating above a forgotten world. They began liturgical ignition before Earth even registered them. That was the rhythm of the Corinth Creed. Worship first, resistance, if encountered, was a misfire in the sequence. Nothing more. The Dominion didn't believe in waiting for invitations. Their arcs aligned over poles and coastlines, casting harmonic shadows into the atmosphere. Pulses began syncing with ionospheric drift, seeking resonance. Points in human brainwave emissions. From orbit, no alarm sounded. No weapons responded. Earth remained inert. The Ark's crew interpreted this as doctrinal perfection, acceptance without struggle. They didn't notice the change at first. From the far side of Europa, beneath its icy crust, ESS Aegis Veil activated. No light, no thermal bloom, just a shift in orbital bleed, a ripple in background radiation so subtle even Dominion scanners filtered it as natural flux. But what left that under-ice launch vector wasn't natural. It was precise. The ship's mimetic array unfurled in total silence. No jamming, no hacking, just infiltration by mimicry. Aegis Veil didn't target the Ark's weapons or shields. It didn't disrupt propulsion or drain power cores. It spoke in the Ark's own voice. The Dominion's liturgical code was recursive by design, a closed belief loop that fed obedience into doctrine and doctrine into obedience. The ship inserted one phrase into that loop, just one. Divinity requires observance. Silence is defiance. At first, nothing happened. The phrase embedded itself inside the third chorus of the compliance hymn, piggybacking off a harmonized feedback pulse that synchronized ritual interface across the fleet. The line repeated only once, then twice. Then it began auto-indexing, not as corruption, but as holy update. Dominion ships, built to receive and reverberate divine order, accepted the phrase as canon. It propagated backward, inserting itself into earlier verses, distorting reference strings, forcing reinterpretation of sacred metadata. Then the voices started skipping. Liturgical cadence across fleet penumbra began stuttering. Choral data loops, normally synchronized across thousands of neural bridges, began overlapping and contradicting each other. Officers linked into the primary belief core began experiencing signal echoes, recursive chant feedback, emotional static. Some heard only one phrase over and over again in their own voice. Silence is defiance. High clerics aboard the Ark attempted to override, initiating doctrinal reset protocols. But the phrase had already embedded itself deeper than the interface layer. It wasn't code, it was structure. Every attempt to delete it forced the ritual systems to reinvoke it, as if denial confirmed its truth. Crew members began convulsing. Ritual leaders lost verbal alignment. Prayers looped, chanted over each other, overwriting command-level functions. The Ark's central node, the very heart of Dominion control, hemorrhaged signal clarity. To the rest of the fleet, it sounded like a god choking on its own scripture. From below, Earth remained silent. To the Dominion, silence had always meant compliance. But now the phrase, silence is defiance, reframed that stillness as active rebellion. The system didn't know how to process it. It couldn't. Dominion neural doctrine wasn't built to handle contradiction. It was built to absorb reverence. But reverence depended on clarity, and now that clarity spiraled into entropy. Orders began to desync. Ritual transitions failed. Standard recitations nullified command strings. A fleet designed to operate through unity of belief now fought its own echo. On the Ark's bridge, a lead chorister screamed mid-sequence, blood spilling from his nostrils as his neurolink fed him inverted ritual loops. Others collapsed in prayer positions, mumbling incomplete phrases, unable to stop. Their minds weren't attacked. They were reflected. To the outside, the fleet still hovered with imperial precision, but inside it was dissolving. Panicked sub-commanders suggested systemic impurity, the result of some heretical bleed from the Ark's Neptune precursor. The solution, per doctrine, was containment by realignment. That meant investigation, physical investigation. And so they sent a delegation. 2 transport vessels peeled from formation and approached the source. What their long-range scans marked as a dormant, foreign vessel drifting just outside Jupiter's magnetosphere. No defenses, no output, no signal. From Dominion perspective, it was a disabled artifact, a relic perhaps, a remnant of Earth's final defensive act, something they could study then discard. The transport crews didn't suspect a trap. Earth didn't have the capability for traps, not according to any intelligence they trusted. Humanity had fallen silent decades ago, but as they drew closer, as they prepared to board, the vessel's shape became clear. It wasn't Dominion, it wasn't old, it wasn't broken, it was watching. And as the airlock opened, the delegation crossed a threshold they didn't understand. They came seeking purity. What they found was a mirror. The boarding vessels latched onto the hull of Aegis Vale like barnacles onto a silent whale. Dominion protocols mandated full liturgical sequencing before entry, an intricate preamble of motion, chant, and encoded gesture meant to harmonize the envoys' minds with divine architecture. But the ship didn't respond. No counter signal, no acknowledgement. To the Corinth delegation, this was confirmation. It was derelict. Whatever strange recursive interference had disrupted the arc above Earth must have bled from this failed vessel. Their mission now had clarity. Isolate, sanctify, report. They entered with reverence, armored in doctrine, not steel. Each officer carried a neural-linked reciter, a compact bioemitter tethered directly to the Ark's liturgical network. Their belief wasn't posture, it was interface. Command inputs took the form of prayer. Navigation systems obeyed only when properly invoked. In the Corinth model, you didn't operate a ship, you communed with it. As they moved through the entry corridor, the quiet unsettled them. It wasn't devoid of malfunction, it was intact, pristine. The vessel showed no structural wear, no battle scarring. Lights remained dim, but operational. Temperature was stabilized, pressure regulated. It didn't feel like a wreck. It felt like a waiting room. Still they proceeded, each step logged through ritual lens, each gesture carefully sequenced to avoid offense. assuming this strange architecture still respected divine alignment. They reached the core chamber without resistance. No automated defenses, no human presence, just the stillness of perfectly configured systems. At the center stood a single interface column, featureless, matte, faintly warm. The senior cleric approached, recited the invocation of clarity, and placed his palm on the surface. The reciter flared once, confirming link. Aegis Veil began recording. Unseen, hundreds of quantum sequence relays activated across the chamber. Every vocal command, every biosignal sync, every linguistic cadence was captured, not in raw format, but in contextual inversion. The ship didn't store the data. It learned from it, twisted it, reversed logical flow and tonal syntax, recompiled the sequences into a mimicry that felt real but moved backward. Within seconds, Aegis Veil understood how the Dominion structured obedience. Within minutes, it could imitate it. Within an hour, it could break it. Rivenhall watched from an isolated relay node 200 kilometers below surface. His pulse never changed. His breathing remained steady. This wasn't combat, it was craft. He didn't need to send commands, the ship was built to react to contact. The envoys had given Aegis Veil everything it needed: ritual cadence, belief hierarchy, system harmonics. Now it was only a matter of inversion. The data didn't need to be hacked. It needed to be played back, wrong. The Dominion broadcast channels, rigid in structure and immune to unsanctioned input, remained wide open to divine traffic. They didn't filter internal recordings. That would imply disbelief. So when the envoy's reciter feeds returned to the fleet, the commanders received unfiltered footage of ritual engagement. At first, it seemed normal. The officers prayed. The systems responded. Liturgical confirmation pulses returned. But then, the patterns stuttered. One prayer sequence, the most sacred one, the invocation of return, executed in reverse syllabic structure. The ship responded anyway. Another officer issued a binding command without the sanctified prefix. The interface obeyed. The crew switched from concordance mode to override without citation, and the ship accelerated its feedback approval. These weren't heresies. These were blasphemies that worked, and the fleet saw all of it. In Corinth doctrine, effectiveness proved divinity. Their entire civilization was built on the assumption that only gods could make the systems function. And here, raw on their feeds, they watched a non-divine structure respond to corrupted faith more efficiently than their purest vessels. To many commanders, it didn't register as failure. It registered as compatibility with something higher. Officers began, hesitating during rituals. Voices cracked in mid-chant. Synced liturgies fell out of harmony as individual minds began to question the certainty of their sequence. The feedback loops responded by amplifying uncertainty. Credence arcs detected rising contradiction levels and began initiating self-purification modes, which under Dominion design silenced the highest-ranking onboard clergy to preserve signal clarity. As a result, the most devout were the first to fall silent. Then the hallucinations began. It started as audio drift. Commanders hearing echoes of themselves doubting into their own reciters. Then visual stutters, interface screens blinking in Earth symbols, crews catching glimpses of human architectural geometry inside their own ships. A senior admiral collapsed mid-communion, weeping, claiming he'd seen a vast black vessel with no prayers, no choir, no light. Only a thought that said, "You were never needed." Belief didn't collapse all at once. It fractured. One fleet element peeled away from formation, citing divine silence as a call to pilgrimage. Another reversed course and exited system space without orders. No shots fired, no commands contested, just voluntary withdrawal, like disciples leaving a chapel mid-sermon because the echo sounded wrong. No one said mutiny, they said incompatibility. It wasn't that the gods had failed, it was that something else had proved itself more aligned, more pure, more real. The Dominion's pride had always been its blindness. No alien system had ever mirrored its structure so precisely. And now, without weapon fire or broadcast threat, the Corinth found themselves unspooling, rituals corrupted, prayers rebounding, faith degrading into static. And from behind the curtain, Aegis Veil said nothing. It had already spoken. Once was enough. Across the central Dominion sectors, silence became more dangerous than heresy. What began as isolated liturgical desyncs now unfolded as systemic breakdown. Credence arcs, once the pillars of godhood enforcement, struggled to maintain neural cohesion. Ritualists wept mid-chant. Junior officers stopped invoking core protocols altogether, afraid their invocations might do more harm than good. In the deepest inner chambers of the Corinth high clerics, where theology and warfare were indistinguishable, panic no longer whispered behind closed doors. It screamed. Doubt had always been the virus they feared, not rebellion, and Earth had injected it without ever raising a voice. The high clerics did not convene. They converged. No records were taken, no votes cast. The decision was ancient, encoded into their doctrine as a fail-safe of last resort. It bypassed the liturgical consensus structure and ignored all hierarchy. The directive was not faith-based, it was structural, and it had one name: the Divine Directive Corps. The Corps was not a fleet. It was not a pre-ship, nor an ark. It carried no neuromimetic arrays, no compliance architecture. It was not built to inspire reverence or restore order. It had no interest in the rituals that defined Dominion identity. The Directive Corps was a thing to be feared even by those who activated it. It recognized one premise only: incompatible systems must be erased. When the Corps deployed, it broadcast nothing. No signal, no chant, no warning. Its vector simply shifted toward Earth, and everything else in its path darkened. On Earth, deep within his bunker, Hall didn't react with alarm. He had expected this escalation. The broadcast corruption had worked too well. The Dominion had tried to reassert control through faith. It had failed. They tried recovery through ritual purity. It had collapsed. What came now wasn't correction, it was extermination. And Aegis Vale, for all its brilliance, couldn't withstand the Directive Corps' direct engagement. It wasn't a ship designed for battle. It was a ship designed to unravel belief. But the Corps didn't believe anything. It simply executed. Hall didn't call command. He didn't warn civilian networks or attempt evacuation protocols. That would imply fear. Instead, he cued the last phase of Protocol Vive IREN, something prepared years ago but never spoken aloud. It wasn't resistance, it was bait. He activated the Aegis Vale's low-orbit companion systems, then tapped a control sequence that triggered every dormant relay station in Earth's ionosphere. From the outside, the planet erupted in signal, an emergency declaration, universal, ancient, full planetary surrender. The signal was unencrypted, omnidirectional, full spectrum. Hall had written it himself, a fabricated voice pleading for forgiveness, offering compliance, submission, harmony. It was everything the Dominion wanted to hear. Every frequency screamed, "We believe now." The Corps changed trajectory immediately. It accelerated toward Earth's upper atmosphere, ignoring the last Dominion fleet elements still grappling with spiritual collapse. Its target was not humanity's voice. Its target was humanity's final contradiction. The Corps did not convert. It did not warn. It would erase Earth from all viable doctrinal structure. It had done this before, on distant moons where ritual systems failed, on colonies that birthed alternative beliefs. Now Earth was added to that list, but as the Corps breached low orbit, its systems began to loop. Not violently, not visibly, but fundamentally. Subroutines requested trajectory confirmation. Trajectory returned was inconsistent. It issued stabilization pings. The pings returned valid and invalid results simultaneously. The Corps triggered a logic reset. The reset acknowledged completion, but never initiated. It had entered a mirror sphere. Hall had known from the beginning that Earth couldn't outgun the Corps, but he also knew something else. Divinity, even in machine form, followed rules. The Directive Corps ran on predicate logic, a doctrine built from axiomatic certainty, assumptions that had never been challenged because nothing had ever reached them. Hal had spent 12 years designing the trap that now held it: Cavendish singularity arrays embedded into a global web of silent satellite shells, each one tuned to reflect divine protocol strings back into themselves, but with shifted predicate chains. The effect wasn't immediate combustion. It was worse. The core began invalidating itself. Every targeting decision generated conflict. Every movement disproved its last. Its divine execution logic spiraled inward, self-referring, seeking alignment from a framework now distorted by deliberate human interference. One moment it declared Earth non-viable, the next it registered Earth as sacred, then as void, then as null. Every classification invalidated the one before. The machine's own sanity fractured, not through attack, but through contradiction. From the bunker, Hal watched the skies dim, not with flame, with stillness. The core's descent faltered. Light curled off its surface like heat mirage. But it was reality bending, not atmosphere. The most powerful weapon the Dominion had ever built was not dying. It was disproving itself out of existence. And above Earth, in full view of every Dominion sensor left operational, the God-Killer unraveled. From space, the directive core appeared unchanged. Still vast, still humming with unfathomable logic, still poised above Earth as if preparing to strike. But within its core lattice, the collapse had already begun. Its override sequence, designed to bypass belief and enforce raw erasure, initiated and failed in the same breath. Every predicate the system relied on, divine target validation, incompatible classification routines, orbital authority locks, met a mirrored contradiction. Yes became no, erase became preserve, truth became falsehood, then both. Its logic engines, meant to stabilize godhood through decision, now consume themselves trying to resolve an identity crisis engineered to have no solution. The first outward sign of failure came not as an explosion, but a flicker. The core's visual spectrum distortions, normally an indication of subspace engagement, stuttered. Its orientation thrusters realigned without input. Its central thought core reset, then did so again, 4 times in under a second. The Dominion's most sacred failsafe wasn't being destroyed. It was unmaking itself, caught in a perfect loop of divine contradiction. And then it stopped. No detonation, no collapse of orbit. The core simply shimmered into a fine, glittering, particulate haze, dispersing through low Earth orbit like a fading memory. Where once there had been an unstoppable force of annihilation, there was now only quantum debris, residual static too faint to track, too disorganized to rebuild. It left behind no wreckage, no monument, just a sky that looked the same as it always had, indifferent and silent. Earth never fired a shot. Aegis Vale did not gloat. It remained in its orbital trench, inert and cold, powered down to minimum emissions. Hayal issued no statement. There was no celebration. The trap had sprung, the predator had vanished, and the hunter simply stepped away. Across Dominion territory, long-range observation nodes recorded the anomaly. Priests and protocol officers parsed the collapse from every angle. None of their models accounted for the event. The core had never failed. It had never returned either. And now it simply wasn't. The reaction was not war, it was redaction. By end cycle, Dominion records were amended, not to declare Earth a threat or to mark vengeance. No fleets were dispatched. No protocols were authorized. Instead, Earth was reclassified as non-interfacing, not sacred, not hostile, not cursed, simply beyond. Removed from the map of divine authority, every reference to humanity's existence was scrubbed from ongoing ritual alignment schedules. Prophecy matrices were recompiled to exclude the Sol system. The name of Earth vanished from sacred navigation lexicons, omitted like a failed word from a holy text. Earth had not defeated the gods. It had become something they could no longer process. In his subsurface chamber, Riven Hall shut down the last of the Varane nodes. No fanfare, just silence, the same silence that had always been his weapon. He archived the final records into a cold storage capsule and keyed it for deep time drift. No one would find it unless they knew exactly where to look, and no one would. Then he left, not through ceremony or announcement. He walked out the access tunnel alone, into an overcast morning in a forest no satellite had mapped in years. Above him, Aegis Vale orbited with its eyes closed. Weeks passed, then months. The world resumed. No missiles fell, no ships arrived. Humanity never knew how close it had come. The footage remained hidden, officially, but unofficially, signals began to leak into Dominion fringe sectors, blurred transmissions, incomplete records, shadows of a vessel that didn't worship, didn't speak, didn't need to. Clips of a god-killer unraveling mid-command, failing to compute a species that simply refused to acknowledge its supremacy. It didn't spread like terror. It spread like doubt. And doubt in a civilization built on recursive certainty was death. Not swift, not loud, but contagious. The Dominion could manage dissent, but they could not algorithmically contain the question that now whispered through every quiet corridor of their empire. What if the gods are wrong? Humanity never stood on a battlefield. It never gave a speech, never raised a banner, never declared resistance. It just waited. And when the moment came, it offered no answer, only silence. The gods looked upon Earth, and then, unable to comprehend what they saw, they looked away. Humanity did not win a war. It disproved a god. Enjoyed the story? What do you think was more dangerous to the Dominion, human technology or human silence? Was Rivenhall a strategist or something else entirely? Comment your thoughts down below. We want to hear from you. If this tale gave you chills, hit that subscribe button for more thrilling HFY stories.